All right, so welcome to the Sparked HL7AU eRequesting TDG meeting for Thursday, the 12th of September. Here's what we've got on the agenda for today. First of all, we're going to cover approval of minutes from previous meetings. We are going to go through the actions quickly, and then we've got a quick follow-up on change of TDG co-chair. Following that, we do have some stuff scheduled for today. We've got the meeting cadence eVote outcome, and then we're going to get on to task search. Depending on how many people we get in the call, we may then continue through the rest of the work for today, or potentially ask people if they want to postpone that. I think we'll work that out as we go. So it sounds, did I get that correct, Michael? Is that what we're going to do?
Yep, I think that's a good plan. We'll go through search and then we'll see where we want to go after that.
Yeah, all right. Okay, everyone, so we've got 3 previous meeting minutes to approve this week. The first one is for the 15th of August. So if you're happy with those meeting minutes, could someone raise a motion, please?
I'll motion to approve those.
And would somebody like to second?
I'll second. It's Christy.
Thanks very much. Okay, so there is a poll up on your screen right now for the approval of the meeting minutes from the 15th of the 8th.
I'll vote affirmative as well. I'm just because I'm the co-host, I can't.
All right, we're going to wrap that one up. And they are approved. 13 affirmative, 7 abstained. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. These are the meeting minutes from the 29th of the 8th. Would anyone like to motion to approve those?
I'll motion again to approve those.
I'll second.
Thank you. All right, so there should be a new poll up now. This is for the meeting minutes for the 29th of the 8th.
+1 affirmative on me as well.
All right, and we shall wrap that one up. Okie doke, so they are approved, 13 for, 7 abstained. And finally, meetings from the last meeting, the minutes from the last meeting for the 3rd of the 9th.
Yep, again, I'll motion to approve those.
I'll second.
Brilliant. Turning into a well-oiled machine here. All right, last one.
And +1 on me for affirmative.
Brilliant. We'll close that one off. They are approved. 13 for and 8 abstained. All right, brilliant. So we do have some action items. I note 3 of them are done, which is great, and there are 3 others in progress. Does anyone who has an in progress want to update, or does anyone have to come back on a complete task?
If these are done, can I ask that people actually tick them? Like in the list of actions, if people complete them, they need to complete that, or they just sit in our action list in Confluence?
Oh yeah, Yep, they need to be ticked off. I think the first two there, I've just put the links in the chat. They're the discussion pages in Confluence that we've got for those two that are open. There's been a little bit of discussion there. I think the next steps for that is for Andy and Angus to prepare a proposal to bring to the TDG. So that was an area where we could just provide comments and feedback, and I think they've got a little bit there now. So the next step would be develop a proposal for those.
Great.
Are we considering the action done, or are we saying that there's still a next steps to send out a proposal for comment to the TDG?
Yeah, I think the next step is the proposal. Yeah.
Can we set that up as a new action so we can close off this one?
Yeah, I think the original one was a proposed, did say set a TDG proposal. So, but yeah, we can do another one.
Well, those two just say develop drafts.
Yeah.
Who's taking the minutes for today?
Christy?
It's me, Danielle.
Okay, awesome. So Christy, if you could capture, should we do one action then to send out the proposal to the TDG for comment for both of these?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. All done on action items? Looks like it. All right. So let's get to the change of AU eRequesting TDG co-chair. All right, so Danielle is stepping back from being a Spark co-chair for the eRequesting TDG. And last week, we basically put forward Michael Wilson as a replacement. However, we had to go back and review the process for this. And essentially, the TDG can nominate an interim co-chair to replace Danielle. That's the HL7 process as it currently stands. And HL7 will, at some point, conduct an election. Now, that election may be this year, noting that all chairs are due for update next year as well. However, I think the solution that we'd like to put forward to you is that Michael Wilson be nominated by the group as an interim co-chair until such time as an election can be held. And that makes a lot of sense since Michael is deeply involved in this project. Danielle?
Yes, I would like to nominate Michael Wilson to be appointed as interim co-chair to my co-chair position. So I'd like to motion that Michael Wilson is appointed as interim co-chair.
I'm happy to second that.
Great, thank you. All right, so we'll launch a poll for this one. So this is a vote for the current motion that Michael Wilson be appointed interim co-chair. And you may vote now. All right, we're going to wrap that one up. 3, 2, 1. And that one is overwhelmingly approved, 22 affirmative. Nothing like getting the validation of your peers, Michael. Congratulations.
I should have thrown a negative for myself.
All right, brilliant. Okay, let's move on. Michael, do you want to talk to this one?
Yeah, I can talk to this one. I might actually share because I think all the next ones are mine. So
yeah, okay.
I'll share my screen. Share screen. That one's there. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen now.
We can see the meeting cadence eVote slide.
Yep,
yeah,
that's the one
perfect.
I'm looking for. So that's good. So yeah, we held an eVote over the last week. You would have seen that come out in your inbox. So that vote has now concluded, and we had the outcome for that was 21 votes, 80% was to hold the fortnightly on Thursday for eRequesting TDG. So that was overwhelming, and therefore our next meetings will be from today, fortnightly from today. So the next one's on the 26th of September, then the 10th of October, and then the 24th of October. So we'll be dropping the Tuesday eRequesting meeting. So we've got time to go through the ballot for comment resolution and the like and bring those on a fortnightly basis to the TDG. So I think we will have to revisit this again when we change daylight saving to work out about start times between Queensland and other states. But for now, it'll remain at 11 o'clock Thursdays from now on. The next update I was going to give was on the ballot for comment. So the ballot period has now closed. That closed on the 8th of September. And we're now in the reconciliation phase of that through till the end of October. So out of the ballot for comment, we had 55 issues raised. So reported by 12 organisations, 16 individuals, and voted on. So people can raise issues and then others can vote on those issues that have been raised. So we had 10 organisations and 13 individuals voting on those. Down the bottom there, we've got the overall ballot vote. So we had 77 that were eligible to vote. We had 8 affirmative, 38 negative, 4 abstain, and 27 with no votes. So we just need to work through all of our issues now. We've started the triage process with the co-chairs. We've triaged 7 of the 55 issues. We've reconciled 3 of those, which were around comments and technical corrections that we could manage, and we haven't applied and we haven't got any to apply yet. But what we'll be doing with this triage over the coming weeks with the TDG, we'll be triaging these issues. We'll bring them to the TDG to vote on. And I might just show you what the co-chairs triage page looks like.
I think it's probably worth noting at this point that over the next week, I think there'll be an email coming out nominating the issues for the next meeting. So giving people, I guess, at least 7 days notice of what we'll be taking to the next TDG.
Yes, correct. So yeah, we want to give you a week's notice with each of those. So we'll aim for by next Thursday to get you out the set of issues we'll be bringing to the following TDG. But for anyone who wants to see what's going on with the co-chair triage, I'll just put the link in the chat to this page, which is where we have all the issues up the top here. These are untriaged. This is the co-chairs working through what potentially dispositions and resolution descriptions are for those issues. So this is very much work in progress, just to be reviewed. The co-chairs then decide when they believe that there's a disposition and resolution description that's in a position to bring to the TDG. So they'll move down here into the triage. From there, we'll bring those to the TDG to vote on to determine if the TDG is happy with that resolution for that item. So we've got some others down the bottom we've been able to resolve to now, which technical corrections that needed no changes, a comment that needed no change, and also a incomplete comment that didn't require any change. So those 3 have been resolved. This is our triage list that we're building up now, which will be the next set that we'll see come to the TDG. We'll also potentially do a mix of issues that we bring to the TDG to discuss in the TDG and vote on within a TDG meeting. We'll also look at doing electronic votes, which is what AU Core has done as well, where we can bundle some of these issues together and then do a vote electronically. Given that we have 55 to get through, we're going to get through it by the end of October. If we bring all of them to meetings, we probably won't get through them all. So we'll try and do some of those asynchronously as electronic votes, similar to what we've just done with the cadence for the TDG meeting. So we can get through these and get them resolved within the resolution period. So I'll just jump back to. Has anyone got any comments while we're here about the ballot for comment triage or the resolution? Happy to answer any questions if anyone's got any at the moment, but we'll be working through this process over the coming weeks. So you'll become familiar with it. All right. Well, I might jump back into task wave. So because we don't have any ballot for comment issues to bring to the TDG this week, because like Danielle said, we want to make sure that TDG's got them well before the meeting, so you can have a look at them and understand them before they're presented in a meeting. So we don't have any to go through in this meeting. We will for the next one in a fortnight's time. So for today, just wanted to continue on where we left off with the task waves. We might try and finish off search for today, and then we'll decide whether we want to continue into system obligations or not. Given this meeting's a bit light today, lots of people are at a Sparked event today. So we might not want to take on system obligations today, given that it'd be better if we had a broader audience for that, but we'll decide that after we get through search. So a bit of update on where we've got to so far. So tasks wave 1 and 2. This was all about must support, cardinality, and types. So all of these have been agreed to in TDG meetings. We've got task 4, requester, group identifier, intent. You can read all those. The last one we added in the last meeting down the bottom there, which we added in last modified. So this is looking pretty complete for the moment. We've also gone through and decided on a number of search parameters, which is part of the task wave 3. These are all the single search parameters we had, which was, owner, patient, requester, focus, group identifier, the like. We also added the identifier searches here for patient, owner, and requester, as well as some combined searches, patient and status, owner and status, requester status, and last updated status and owner. So they're all the ones we've agreed to. They're already there. They'll be making their way into the IG, which can then be commented on as well. So just wanted to, I think we didn't get to the end of it in the last meeting where we're still talking through some search parameters. So I just wanted to try and close out search, and then we can move on to obligations if we want. So I think one of the ones we did discuss in the last 2 meetings was around the focus identifier. So this one, originally we discounted because we didn't think that identifier was a must support element on service request. After the meeting, identified that it is actually a must support. So this was so that you can provide a local identifier from the placer system against the service request. And the idea here was that you could then search for tasks using the service request local identifier that you have. So this would be a search to support placer systems, bound to use their local identifier and find tasks assigned to their service requests. So given that this is a must support element, I think it is fair that that would be a valid search parameter. And yeah, so should support searching using identifiers assigned to the service request. Example use cases of place a search for tasks they have requested using their local identifier for the service request. Andy?
Just wondering why it needs to only be the identifier, and why this wouldn't be to support search on focus.
That's a good question that we didn't add that in at all, did we? Oh no, we've got focus. We already have focus. So this is just to make sure that identifier, same as what we did for patient identifier, owner identifier, requester identifier, is this would be focus identifier.
Wouldn't that be a search requirement on service request?
So by just trying to understand the logic there, so that if we're saying that you should be able to, or you shall be able to search by focus, that would then imply that all the search parameters that we have on service request would apply here as chained on the task.
Yes.
I don't know. Or are you just going include? Like you don't automatically get chained everything. Because if we just go focus and include, then you get it. Or
If you're doing a search with include and you include the focus, then you are then doing a search, kind of another depth of search then on service request. I don't think that would be evaluated as a constraint on the service request search, not on the task. So for instance, if I have to enable, having recently gone through this, if you want to add a search parameter, for instance, to, as I did the other day, communication request, and you want to be able to search on about, which isn't provided normally, then if you have got that in a include, it's actually not about where you're starting the request from. It's actually about the communication request capability, search capability itself. So I don't think the search would be constrained by task, it would actually be constrained by the service request.
yeah, I agree with that.
So by the same logic though, we've done it here for patient, owner, requester. I don't disagree, but this is the way we have done it for these search parameters.
I guess we just have to, I don't know whether, we just have to check and make sure that, for instance, with patient, in a call patient, you can search by identifier, or it's a shell. Is it a shell and you call patient?
It is, yeah.
So I don't know whether this would actually, for instance, if you had a discrepancy, so it was a shell, it was a shell here and it wasn't a shell in AU core, it was a shell in AU core, but it wasn't here. And obviously, I think you're going to just inherit the constraint.
It's a good point.
Actually, I'm actually gonna slightly say no. That's a slight no. So on the patient resource in AU core, identifier is a shell, but it doesn't. But if we want to actually say that you need to search by the chained patient identifier, you've got to call that out for all resources as shell, because we don't have task in AU core. So
Yeah.
So
I
that
agree.
we have to do say shell here, and
I think
the
you
same
need
for
to
like
be-
service request. Yeah.
I think you need to be explicit, yeah, because like if you were facading this, you would have to implement that, right? So I think you need to be explicit and identify which searches you want supported.
Which is what we've got. We've got patient.identifier shell here. So that does that.
Yeah, but Andy, do you want focus identifier as well?
No, I don't. because once I've got to focus, I'm subject to the obligations of focus in search. So if focus is a service request and service request obligates me to support a shell support search on identifier, then I need to do that. So it's kind of redundant to put, I think, identifier obligation here.
Cool.
So are we?
I don't know whether these are redundant as well, given if patient is an AU core patient, patient.identifier is once I've got a linked reference through to that patient, I'm obligated to support for an AU core patient an identifier search. So even, for instance, if AU patient has, I can't remember what else is obligated around search an AU core patient, but in effect, I will have an obligation from here to also support patient dot whatever it is.
Yeah.
You only on the patient resource itself. I mean, you.
Yes. So that's what this is linking to, right? So
No, it's not. Well, this is the search parameters for the task resource. And so you got to do it resource by resource.
Yeah.
And we don't have task in AU core. So there are 0 AU core search requirements applied at this time, unless there was an AU core task.
I guess what I'm saying is in terms of linking this to include, if I'm doing a include on task.patient, and then I want to say patient.identifier equals X, I am obligated to have support for patient.identifier based on my AU core obligation.
I'll have to think about it. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Because I mean, when you're including and you want to say and you want to, because if you're just saying for this thing include the patient, you're not actually really searching on the patient resource. You're just going whatever that's referenced. But if you want to, because you're not then trying to find the patient record via task. So I'll have to sit down with a diagram and try to branch that out, but I'm not convinced that it is applicable.
Because you
Yeah,
can use
'cause
the
I think-
search without an include, but you can
Yeah.
also use it with an include.
Yeah, because the include, you need to have a resolvable patient reference, whether it's by or whatever it is in the task, right? So to be able to include, so that's independent of this anyway.
Because I think the include, which is, as Brett said, the resolvable patient, is another way to get the patient resource. It's not using the patient search parameters to do so.
Yeah, I guess I'm just, I am curious about whether there is a disconnect. I think we're going to have to, in this, if we are going to say something, we need to at least have covered off the referenced resources obligation.
I would agree with that.
I think you could be more constrained, but you can't be less constrained. So we couldn't move something back to a should, I guess.
I would agree with that. I think where we are is consistent with that.
I guess if we just had for some of these things, rather than saying you can search by identifier, we simply said you must be able to support patient, for instance, as a search parameter. We then say that you can use anything that the patient is obligated to support, or
Yes.
So does that make it redundant, because we have said that over here?
Yeah, I thought we were further constraining. So the shall patient, yes, and then the shall patient dot identifier, I think we did have questions about that in one of our previous meetings, that theoretically by patient dot identifier being shall, you essentially meet this one.
unless you want to,
there are
you
other
wanna
ways, yeah.
search like patient name. Like, are we then saying by having patient
That isn't counted by the patient reference. Patient dot name doesn't satisfy this, I don't think. Oh,
Okay.
No, I don't think so. That's because that's a separate chain, right? So
yeah.
yeah, you have to actually implement chaining to, yeah, because you can search by reference and not implement search by chains.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not by default. You get that.
Yeah, so this is a reference.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think there's a typo in here that says token, but these are reference
Yeah, it should be reference.
search parameters. You're right. And whereas when we get here, these are token. So they
When
identify.
we say reference, can that also be a logical reference?
We haven't been explicit on that.
Which means, I mean,
Sure.
if we're saying you should support all references, then can I use an identifier in my reference?
I'm looking that up actually. What does reference give you? Is it just?
Do we actually want to go through that then for the group? Like, let's go look at reference at the patient search parameter for task and how it can be surfaced, and just do that walkthrough from the fire standard, just so that we're sure that everybody understands the options available.
Or if you're going down a rabbit hole.
I think we're already down it, aren't we?
It's very dark.
Yeah, I figured we just started the journey.
Climb out of it now.
In reality, it's the clinical patient search parameter. That's what this really is. The common clinical patient search parameter.
Yeah, I don't think it. I put the link in the chat. Yeah, I don't think I think it's only reference. It doesn't include logical ID. Does it? Oh, it doesn't include. Well, what does it say? I think this is badly written. Because that is the resource ID.
Another thing that might be easy enough to view is, where is the automatic link to it? Here we go. This. So R6 has a better presentation of it, same rules. And that is, if you scroll up, that's the actual search parameter for patient. And that's its rules. And if you click on common search parameter, clinical patient, that will give you, because it goes, oops. It's across that's the same search parameter that goes across everything, and it is a search type reference. It's a different data type than the element data type, which I think Brett put the link to. What does the search data type reference do? And yeah, you've got the link there about the different parts. So the search data type reference is made up of several different things you can use. So you can search by ID, and you can search by type, and you can search by URL, which is, I guess, what we were looking at in the previous thing. If you click on reference there, which is where you were before that. So some of what we've just shown people is how you can navigate potential like search parameters, and that gives you the different ways you can do that.
Yeah, so it's all relative. Yeah, it's all relative reference, right? And the type is either implied or supplied.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So you can see the example down there of get HTTP example with the observation subject equals patient /123. And that's an example of constructing how to do that.
So you don't get identifier for free. You have to chain it if you want to do patient identifier. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are other examples on how to do reference with the URL, with an absolute URL, a relative URL, or you can put like just the ID in. Yep.
Does that help?
So if we wanted to search by IHI, we do have to specify that the chained thing is a shell.
Yeah, any specific, yeah, like Towinder's one there with by name, you need to.
Yeah, so apart from this typo here, which says token, these are all reference. So yeah, that's all you get is the reference.
Particularly, you only get the literal reference. You don't get a logical reference.
So that's why we have then been explicit saying to do chaining with identifier, that we want that.
Yeah, if you're going to allow your tasks to reference by identifier, that might be how you refer to everything rather than explicitly having a URL, or a relative reference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just ask, for those people online, is there anything that we just were walking through that you'd like us to go into more detail on? All right, let's keep going. But if anyone has any questions or there's a specific part where you want us to walk through what does a particular search type mean, or what is this multiple or business, then please pop that in the chat or pop your hand up.
Right. So coming back to this, so we didn't have in our list at the moment the chain search using focus identifier, which is the service request identifier. We had it for patient and requester and the like. So I think now we've gone through that, this is a search parameter that we would want so that a placer can search for tasks using their local identifier for the service request.
I'm not sure that's kind of a use case by existence. Not really a use case, because it's basically defining the mechanism, not the actual clinical need for it.
Yes.
I mean, I look over those searches and go that they all make sense and that they kind of are valid kind of searches, but I'm really not sure the actual clinical use of those. I mean, you can come up with an arbitrary going, I'm interested in this, and therefore I'll search for it. But I'm not sure that interest is actually necessarily a kind of a mandatory part of the delivery of the service. And this is for this one, like I can certainly see that you want to get the service request associated with the task. That all makes sense. You're going to do that anyway, because in getting a fulfillment obligation and taking it on, you need to pick up the details of what is actually being requested. But would you want to be discovering those obligations on service request? Even in the point that you go, well, look, I've just got this local placer identifier, and therefore I need to go and look up every task that I'm associated with to see if it's actually one of those. I just don't think that's the way a system's going to operate. But I don't understand the obligation associated with this as being a, we can't operate unless this was supported.
No, but I think it's providing the status tracking for the placer. So I want to know where my service request is at. So I need to find the tasks for it. So
would you do that by requisition though, instead of, because that's actually a
well, what we're saying, if we don't have this,
yeah.
that's the only way you can do it. Yeah, if we don't have this, it means you can't use your local identifier for your searching.
Because this is not a shall populate field, right?
We're not searching on individual placer identifiers. I mean, it's not like that when you create this, that you're throwing away your local kind of information. You're simply placing this you place it as an order with a set of service requests associated with the order, and then you're generating a set of tasks representing the fulfillment of them. You don't need to go and rediscover this from the eRequesting service.
Yeah. So I don't think he's in the meeting, but this was brought up by Daniel Fulks when we asked about additional search parameters, and that's where he thought it was valuable. Maybe we have to.
I think if we can get a realistic, like a real use case, as in, and I'm just going back to what do we do today in terms of fire-based eRequesting, and whether this is an obligation that we need in order for the thing to work. And I don't see that as a unique feature that's needed. So generally, if you can kind of get that use case kind of to be more specific on a real use.
Does anyone else on the call have a position where I think there is a valid use case for this? We'll have to circle back and get Daniel to.
I can only think of when, like in a placer system, if you want to search for status updates for a given order, and then you can, usually most of the placers will pull in the background for all the orders that are in the system. But if doctor has opened the screen and is looking at particular order and is willing to see the update happen to a particular order, he can click the button as update, and the system can go and pull the status update of the task resource using the order number, order identifier, and the patient identifier. So when you are looking on based on particular order.
The way we already described to task updates, as soon as we create an order, we're watching for task updates on the order fulfillment. So when that comes back, we will be tracking and updating relative to the task. You know, the whole service request stuff is pretty much read only at that point. We're not modifying it. It's a state that we manage and control. So we're still going to have references to both task and service request.
Yeah, this is more on like if system wants to just look for update on a fly, not for a particular order. So I have a local identifier of an order, and I go and make a call to the server to give me the task resource for given order and task to check the status of the task resource on a fly. I know most of the placers are going to do as a background job to keep checking the status, but any system can build. It can be a patient system or any other system can build to go and look for a order status on a fly using this field. They can fetch it.
Okay. Well, I'll open it up. If anyone wants to make a motion, I think this is important, and wants to motion that we hold a vote on this, they can. Otherwise, we'll just let it sit for the moment if there's not a real feeling that it's something we need. So unless someone wants to make a motion that we do support this now, we might just move on. We can come back to it another time. There's a stronger use case for it. Okay. Well, we won't vote on that for today. We might just move on, and might follow up with Daniel and see if he wants to bring it up in a future meeting. So we just talked about a little bit there, but we do want to talk about the _include search parameter. So the fire _include parameter allows you to retrieve a primary resource along with the related resources referenced within it in a single query. So this is conceptually similar to doing a SQL join. And what it basically means you don't have to do multiple requests. So you don't have to go and get the task and then do another get request to get the service request, or to get the patient, or to get other referenced resources. You can use the _include to say, when you give me the task, give me those related resources as well in the bundle that comes back in the search. So the example we've got here, so to include with the task, the patient resource referenced by the task for element, you would do a get on task. That should be _include. It's missing the underscore on it, but task include equals task for. So then that will retrieve the patient with the task in your search. So we've got a proposal here to support the _include search parameter for the following task elements, which are ones that we have must support on. So it'll be patient, which references AU core patient, and requester, which references the AU core practitioner role, the owner, which is the AU core organization, and focus, which will reference either the eRequesting imaging request or the eRequesting pathology request. Does anyone have any questions on that, or need a bit more information on what we have, Tawinda?
We need part of as well.
So part of isn't currently a must support parameter because we haven't done groups yet. So yeah, given it's not must support, I wouldn't propose that we actually have it now, but that's when we come around to groups and we talk about those relationships between different tasks, then we would look at doing that as part of that as well, right? So when we're going to have to come back around and do groups in the future, and any additional elements we come up with, we're going to have to go through all these waves. We'll do it in one go, I suspect, where we'll say we're adding a new element. It's must support. This is the cardinality. This is the types. These are the search parameters that go with it. But for the moment, we don't have part of as a must support element. Well, if there's no questions on this, I'd like to make the proposal that we do support these underscore include search parameters for these elements on task, being patient, requester, owner, and focus. If anyone wants to second that.
Are you saying that you want to make this a shell? Is that the proposal?
Yes, so it shall support include, yes.
I don't have an issue with it. I'm going to have a second.
Sorry, Andy, I missed that. Was that a second?
Yeah, second.
All right. Okay.
What was the comment before you seconded it though? You said you don't think
just whether it was the wording here is just to say proposal to support node. Wanted to just clarify that we're talking about this is to become a shell support, and therefore you're obligated to support these underscore includes. And I guess referencing the obligation associated with a facade implementing these, you're mandated to allow for to be underscore included in a reference in a search.
All right.
I think it's a good point though, whether it should be a should or a shall. I'm just not sure if we've got the ability to actually say that in the conformance statement.
Yeah, neither do I. I think it's a very good point.
Yeah, actually, sorry, I might jump to another window just to show that. What have we got here? We have, I mean, the place where it would be, the shell would be on the server, because this is, I think it's come up before as well, is that clients need to know how a server is going to behave, right? So if I've built on my queries to use include in my client, and then some servers support it and some don't, it makes it really difficult. So the way it shows up is in the capability statement. So here there's an underscore include. I assume that implies a shell, right? It's not optional. If it's...
I think you can explicitly say shell with the extension.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, you're right though. It does say.
I mean, we can say that the intent is shall, and exactly how we apply that can be implementation detail, but
yeah, the element says server supports include.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your words are actually what the capability statement.
Yeah, that's probably where it came from, right?
Yeah.
So I think that is an indication that it does support it.
Hmm.
But yeah, if you can put a conformance qualifier on it, I think. But I'm not sure how that manifests in the actual presentation either.
It doesn't. That's the thing.
Yeah,
like it only it only renders in the table at the top of the capability statement. It's not even mentioned in the details about the resource. So, you know, you call, for example, you've got medication request with a medication as an include. And it doesn't even show in the details about medication request. It only shows up in the table at the top where we've got all a summary of all of the resources and its, you know, CRUDs and include capabilities and stuff. So, but I think it's, if we're going to do this, I think we need to make sure that we are saying it, even if it's not manifested properly. We work out how we're going to actually represent it in the capability statement. I think we need to say whether it's shall or should in this motion.
Yeah, I agree that the intent is shall. Exactly how it manifests itself as a shall is a separate implementation detail, right? So I'll just.
I would like to hear from Tawinda and those, but I'm feeling that like that might be a bit of an impost. This is quite a significant effort, unless you're using out of the box via server. I think it might be a should, personally.
If it's a should though, then how do you your client system has to assume that has to rewrite its queries depending on which system it's connecting to.
Yeah.
Which would be, you'd have to be the lowest common denominator, which I have to assume that no one supports it.
I do think that we want to aim at a really simple way of getting access to an order. So I think really needs to come in at the task resource and be able from that point to accumulate content of the order. So without doing this, going back and iteratively gathering all of the reference resources would be an absolute pain in the ass.
And it makes for a very chatty interface, right? Because you've got to go and get everything separately, separate requests.
All right, let's go with shall.
Okay. So I'll just reiterate then that this proposal is shall support _include search parameter for the following task elements: patient, requester, owner, and focus.
Can I ask about, sorry, I've only just dropped in, but the couple of others I use here is the requester, I do a iterate to get the practitioner for the practitioner role. Is that out of this scope of this?
I deliberately stayed away from that because iterate just opens up a can of worms.
Yeah.
I understand where you're coming from, but I guess I'm just looking for a lower entry point here.
Lower hanging fruit. Yep, that's fine. The other one is rev include consent, but we haven't even done consent.
No,
yeah,
I
haven't done rev include deliberately as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, not even
that's good.
If you want to do a rev include on a task to get the service request, you've got the service request, you want to find the fulfillment task for the service request, and you wanted to use a rev include. Is that rev include on the task, I'm presuming?
I think they're separate proposals anyway. So
yeah, they would be.
I'm not discounting them. This was kind of trying to just introduce the concept of _include as a minimal concept first, and then we can get into the more advanced stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I'm on board with the ones you had documented there. I think there's more later.
So, Michael, I'm happy to second this set of 4 as a shell.
Okay. Are we ready to go this time?
Sorry,
yes?
Chris.
Yep. All right. No, that's fine. Okay, great. So we are now going to vote for the motion that has been proposed. Should see a poll on your screen.
I'm a +1, 2. I'll be back in 2 seconds.
All right, we're going to close that one off in 3, 2, 1. And that is approved, 13 for and 4 abstained. think now we're waiting for Michael to come back. How's the event going? Does anyone want to report in on the event?
It's going really well. There's a lot of people. Here you go.
Ah, sorry about that.
All right,
Okay,
was approved, Michael.
great. We've got about 20 minutes left. I think we've got a quorum now, so we might move into task 4 or wave 4 on task. I think this is probably just going to be, given we only got 20 minutes, just a bit of a introduction, start socializing the concept of this. What we'll probably have to come back to this after we get through the ballot for Brett just showing the room he's in here. So is that everyone that's in TDG, Brett? So we'll do a bit of an introduction. This will probably have to come back to this after we get through the ballot for comment resolution, given that we're going to those 55 items we're to get through. So that'll be the key focus for the rest of the rest of the month, and probably right through to October. But we'll do a bit of an introduction so we can socialize the concepts and see where we get. So wave 4 is around system obligations and workflow management. So this is probably the biggest of all the waves we've got, and it'll take us a while to get through when we get to. So this is around assigning the obligations to things that we have labeled as must support. So that basically labeling an element as must support means that system that produces or consumes a resource shall provide support for the element in some meaningful way. So our obligations are going to define what that meaningful way means to which actor and what they have to do. So before we've just said must support, but we haven't said what that must support means. So when a profile contains an element labeled as must support, it shall also make clear what kind of support is required. So that's what we haven't done yet for task. And the meaning for must support can be specified in terms of obligation codes on the element definition. And you'll actually see we've already done this for those that have been along the ride for eRequesting so far. If we look at our current service request, and you'll see here on our element identifier, we have obligations identified over here for each of our actors. We have our eRequesting placer, filler, server, and patient access. And then we've assigned the obligation to that: populate if known, no error, handle, and the like. So this is the activity we're going to do now for task. And this is the way it shows up in IG with those obligations. Jump back. Yeah. So here are some examples of those fire obligation codes. This is not all of them. This link down the bottom, which I will put in the chat. Find that in the chat. Gives the full definition of all of them, but we're just going to provide some examples here to walk through. So this is for a resource producer. So something that produces, a system that produces fire resources. And we've got some obligation examples here of populate. So the conformant application producing resources shall or should indicate this element, should include this element if a value is known and allowed to be shared. So the allowed to be shared really falls into So privacy and security and the like. So just because you have it doesn't mean you can share it. Basically saying if you have it and you are allowed to share it, then you should populate it or shall populate it. Then we've got populate if known. So conformant applications producing resources shall or should correctly populate this element if they know a value for the element. And it's got here, but is acceptable if the system is unable to ever know a value for the element. Now, this is really confusing. Heath, do you want to explain your take on that one? Because I know you've done this so many times. So.
Okay, so probably the easiest way to describe these is the difference between populate if known and able to populate, because populate actually inherits from the other two. All right, so that's really probably just, we should have probably done the order slightly differently. So populate if known is basically if you know that if you have the concept in your system and you're then you should populate that value in the instance. But if you don't have the concept, you don't have that field in your database, then you don't have to. That's okay. It's not on your user interface. It's not in your database. It's must support, you just don't know the concept, so that you don't have to populate it. Whereas able to populate means that even if you don't have it on your screen, you still need to demonstrate in some circumstances within a conformance scenario that you can populate that. And we have tried to avoid that particular one in AU core because of that issue around even if you don't have that field, you still have to demonstrate conformance to it. And then populate is basically the combination of the two, but with the concept of that if there is able to share, as in you don't have to provide it if there is a security implication associated with it. So that's really the key difference, is that populate inherits the if known and able to capable scenarios, whereas independently if known is just more about if known and are allowed to, etc. So I don't know if that's any clearer, but I guess
every time we go through it, it's
yeah, the precedent that we have so far is that we're using if known unless there is absolutely essential that it's always populated. And keeping in mind that these really only take much effect if for mandatory elements. I mean, there's still some rules around optional elements, but it's really for mandatory elements that it really matters. So if you're really confused, there is a whole heap of PowerPoints that I did for AU Core. We could probably make those available. Hopefully that expresses it more clearly than I just did verbally. Otherwise, yeah, you can come back to this page that Michael's showing at the moment and have a look at the notes associated with it, because the notes do try and make it a little bit clearer than the actual definitions themselves.
Yeah, and you'll see this last column on the right here is the parent. So there is a hierarchy here of obligation codes, and you'll see populate has a parent of populating if known or able to populate. So this is a sort of hierarchy of obligation codes, and yeah, exactly what Heath said. The notes here try to clarify. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it actually makes it more confusing. But at least the idea here is that these obligation codes are defined in the fire spec. So rather than us making up our own obligation codes and they're only relevant to us in eRequesting or Australia or something like that, these are things that are part of the base fire spec, so that there is consistency then in the way they're applied. So definitely have a read through this. It's worth having it, and like I said, we'll provide a link in the minutes to the presentation that Heath has done in AU Core on all of these. So we'll add those in.
So the weaker one is if known. The stronger one is what's it called again? Able to populate.
Yeah.
And populate is basically the combination of the two.
Yeah. So I think to summarize, the populate if known means my system doesn't have to have it. My system doesn't have to have that capability. It doesn't have to support that element. If it does, it should populate it, right? But if my system doesn't support it, it's fine. The able to populate means that my system has to support it in some situation, right? To basically to show conformance, it has to show I can do it, but it doesn't mean I have to do it in every scenario. This means that I have to have the capability to do it somewhere at some time. And then populate is I have to do it, basically. My system has to support it.
And I think intent is a good example, because probably no system will actually have a database field or a UI screen or anything on for the concept of intent. But from an integration perspective, it's a must support with a very strong able to populate kind of context, because without it, we don't know what the hell it means, basically.
And the last one, which is a bit more obvious, is persist. Ensure the values of this element are stored in a persistent data store.
And that's just an example of the kind of things. There are more of these as well. So again, go and have a look at the full list. But it's really the ones in bold that are likely to be used.
And then, yeah, so the consumer client app, some of the ones for that are the no error. So this is the conformant application should accept the resource containing any valid value for the element without error. So this is basically saying there's no obligation on what you have to do with it, but given this is a must support element, you're going to get it and you need to not fall over, right? Other than that, there's no obligation on what you have to do with it. That's entirely up to your system. Just saying that you need to be able to accept it. Then there's reject invalid. Conformant applications shall or should check that values for this element meet all the data constraints asserted. If fidelity issues are found, the system shall should not accept the instance. Again, this is the client, so what does accept mean? But basically saying that if you get something, you should be validating them and making sure they're valid before you do anything with them. Persist, again, on a consumer, you should be persisting the value for the element. Handle is conformant application shall handle the meaning of this element correctly. So again, handle is very open. We're not actually defining necessarily how you handle it, but it's basically saying it's important and you should be doing something with it, as opposed to no error means there's no obligation that you'd have to do anything with it. Handle means that you should be doing something with it. It's important information. And then display is that you need to show it to a human so they can view that element. So they're the sorts of ones we've got to choose from. And there are others in that list, but these are the ones that I think we're likely to be looking at without obligations when we're going through.
And again, there's a hierarchy. So handle is a child of no error. And I think off the top of my head, persist and display is a child of handle, etc. So that code system sort of, again, explains that hierarchy.
Can an element have two, like display and handle?
Yes, we've actually already done it in.
Yes,
find it.
You're right.
We see here we've got the server shall handle and able to populate. Okay, so now I'm getting back into eRequesting actors. So this talks about service requests. This is what we've already talked through on service requests, but we've got our actors, which is the eRequesting placer. These are the client apps. We've got eRequesting patient access and eRequesting filler, and then the eRequesting server that they all use. And the roles we've got for service requests is that a placer will create and update service request. A filler will read and search a service request, and patient access will also read and search that service request. So that's just sort of highlighting what we've already got. Now we need to move into task along the same sort of lines of what are the obligations there. So these are the interactions that we're looking at for, just looking there. Oh, so these are the interactions we're looking at for when you create the diagnostic request. So at the same time, you're creating the service request, creating a fulfillment task with it, and expecting that the obligation here would be on the placer system to create or update that task that they create at the same time as the service request. And the server shall support the creation and the update of that task. Just check, Heath, that I got that right, that was the intent of this one.
Yeah, we're just looking at, I guess this is more of a sequence diagram, but rather than drawing a sequence diagram of just using the original actor one. So we're just thinking about that initial kickoff interaction between the placer and the server to create a diagnostic request, all right, which includes a task, etc. So what are the interactions that we need to do between those two actors as part of that? So we're basically saying there's a create and an update. They're the two interactions that we think might need to be created between those two actors.
Yeah, so yeah, the eRequesting placer, the client here is creating or updating the task on the eRequesting server. Does anyone want to discuss that? Because this, I mean, it is something we need to sort of agree that it'll be the placer's obligation to create the initial task with the service request. I think that's the way we've been talking about it, but this is now moving into that. This is where we're looking at having that obligation. Is there anyone who had a different opinion and thought that the task might get created somewhere else by someone, a different actor? We'll discuss it. No? That's good.
Sorry, Michael, is it only about the task or the order? Diagnostic request.
So the service request we've already done. So the service request does have those obligations to support the create and update of the service request. So this is now we're talking about these interactions for task itself.
And keeping in mind that I am again focusing on the initial initiation of the service request or the diagnostic request. So go more general. So there is scenarios later where another system might need to create a task, but that's not part of this particular, for lack of a better word, use case.
Okay, yeah, that's what I'm thinking. But for the update, is that we talking about put or patch?
No, it is update. Patch is different. So it is just, and I guess one variant that we could actually talk about here is this an update create? as well. And maybe I'm confusing things even further. So could I use a update interaction to actually do the initial creation? But I'm not really getting into that. I don't think it matters from this perspective, whether maybe that's a downstream point, but main thing is that where a placer has the ability to create an update because we're expecting them to do the initial creation of the task as part of uploading the service request as well. That's really the use case. And if they have a change that they want to make to that task for whatever reason, then they have that, they're allowed to do that as well.
Brett?
Yeah, I was just going to present my alternate universe where tasks are completely managed by fulfillment, by the filler. And so the methodology would be using service request performer to identify a directed request and then letting the filler drive the task creation and updates, and then the placer is only a reader of the fulfillment status, which I don't think is very popular, but it's just another consideration because it does take a piece of the puzzle away from the placer that they don't need to be able to create these things, and that's not then the mechanism that you use to direct those requests. But yeah, I think there are others that think that's a bad idea.
Again, there is another slide later which will enable a filler to create and update a task. I mean, I guess the only question in your mind or from your perspective is, do you want to disallow a placer from creating a task? So without fully ratifying a particular workflow and business process even,
yeah,
from an interoperability specification, implementation guide specification, all we're really doing here is saying we think that there is a need for a placer to create and update a task.
No, they must be able to.
Okay, then let's move forward.
Well, that's what this says. That's what this says. It says shall, whereas I would say maybe it shouldn't be shall.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No. Again, there is the shall from a capability perspective. It's a shall. We're not saying from a business process a shall. All right, that's the distinction here. So a placer system shall support the ability to create or update.
We've only got a couple of minutes. Angus, you got a final comment? Oh, can't hear.
Hear me now?
Yep.
I assume the last two aren't populated because we're just not addressing that yet. Like so the filler system.
Yeah. We'll just try to
update a task.
Yeah, just chunk
okay.
it so we could focus on one thing at a time. Yeah.
Because we're talking about that initial creation of a diagnostic request, the initiation of it.
I'll just jump ahead. This is kind of where we'll get to with all the obligations, right? So just kind of stepping through it, starting at where we start and working through all of them. But this is potentially where we would end up. It's definitely not going to be this meeting, and probably a few meetings before we get to this. But all of these slides will be in this slide deck for the minutes today. So I think it is well worth everyone, if you have some time, to go through it and start to think about some of these concepts and obligations, because we will have to work through them all, and there's a lot in here to understand. This is probably the most complex part we've got to deal, one of the most complex parts we've got to deal with in eRequesting on these obligations. So yeah, the slide pack will be there in the minutes. So definitely have a look, and then we'll come back through and probably spend a number of meetings on going through this after we get through ballot for comment.
I mean, we could vote on this slide and skip a whole heap of steps, but I suspect that we're not going. we can't even get through the first slide. So that's why we have broken this down into, like I said, kind of use case-based steps of, okay, first part of the process, second part of the process, third part of the process. And yes, there might be alternative thoughts around what that process might be, but and again, what's the time? We've got 2 minutes. I'm willing to motion back on the previous one that there is a shell on POSIT and server, and I get what you mean, Brett, that if there is an alternate universe, then that is a should, but or capability. But I'm thinking from a POSIT perspective that is not necessary from the server. The server needs to do a shell either way. But at this point in time, my proposal is that it is a shell from the POSIT and a shell from the server for both create and update.
I think it's a bit confusing because this is about create and then you're trying to do update at the same time. So,
yeah, but if you created something and you did something wrong, then you want to be able to update it. So yeah, I get what you mean, yes, but you know, I didn't want to have 20 slides.
No, I just think about talking about update.
I'm not sure. Well, we've just hit time, so I'm not sure that we can actually vote on that today. We'll have to come back around and reintroduce it when we get back around to it as well. So we might have to just close out.
Yep.
Cool. Thanks, Michael.
For those, anyone too that missed earlier, that the election vote has gone through, that we're moving back to fortnightly eRequesting TDG meetings. That'll be on Thursday. So the next one will be 2 weeks from today, on the 26th of September, and then continue fortnightly on Thursdays.
Great. That's it for today, everyone. Thank you very much. We shall see you all on the 26th of September.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.